Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we will continue our reading of Aunt Jenny and the Delayed Quest by Jim Burroughs. Aunt Jenny is making her way to visit King Vrain, or the man who used to be king. Chapter 8, The Haunted King. It was a couple of days before the Osprey was ready to depart the Shadowed Isle, during which time Aunt Jenny went shopping again. This time she commissioned a new outfit rather than buying off the rack, one suited, she hoped, for a longer expedition. She started with a divided walking skirt, essentially very loose-fitting trousers, with pockets, deep pockets. To this she added a shirt and safari jacket, both with pockets, and a new canvas shoulder bag with divided compartments to keep little Dickens, her knitting, and her tools all separate. She topped it off with high laced boots and a broad-brimmed straw hat. Someone had spread the word of the story of Aunt Jenny and the Sea Beast, and the children of the Shadowed Isle marketplace insisted on being regaled with it firsthand. So she told it, and then had to retell it for latecomers, and then again. The next telling involved acting it out with Sasha taking the roles of Ashetta and Morwenna, and 3 as the Beasts. He could have made a great star of the movies of the silent picture era, wonderfully melodramatic. Again, even Big Tom got in on the final performance. All this was to the great delight of the purveyors of drinks, snacks, and sweetmeats, who did a thriving business in the square all around her. Late the next day, when she picked up her new clothes, she was surprised, though perhaps she shouldn't have been, to have found the pocket of her jacket decorated with the embroidered silhouette of a swordswoman lunging her rapier through the heart of something that looked more like a dragon than the beast man she'd actually slain. At least it wasn't repeated in full size across the back. The trip northwestward, or dusk winterward, across the Great Lake was uneventful, as was the trip up the Blackwater, where northwestward tended to be described as dreamward. Soon, only a couple of days out from the Shadowed Isle, the Osprey and the small fleet of fishing boats that accompanied her hove into sight of the small Wolfdale's fishing village, beyond which the hermit fisherman who had once been king was said to live. "We'll be putting you ashore at yon docks, my lady. Himself has said not to favour visitors, and ships flying a foreign flag, and her ladyship's, is not like to please him o'er much," explained the captain. Aunt Jenny transferred little Dickens from the pocket of her safari jacket to her new bag. Morwenna, Sasha, and 3 slung their packs and rucksacks. 3 was sporting a match to Sasha's rucksack and cargo shorts in the same dull green as Aunt Jenny's outfit. A new dagger hung at his waist. He took Rudy's leash. Big Tom had spent more than an hour grooming and fluffing his fur. They were all ready. As they made their way down the dock, a fellow clad in leathers and mail, sword on his hip, truncheon in his hand, walked toward them. He was followed at a respectful distance by a couple of fishermen or dock workers. "And what'd be bringing your ladyships to Blackfish, may I ask?" he challenged them. Aunt Jenny stepped forward. "I'm called Aunt Jenny. We are just passing through town on our way upstream. And you are?" "Constable hereabouts, charged with keeping the peace and looking out for the populace." "A pleasure to meet you, Constable." She stuck out her hand. The constable eyed her hand but did not shake it. "And they be?" He pointed his chin toward the others. "Ah," she gestured with the rejected hand. "Lady Morwenna of the Fair Folk, Sasha of Hockomock, the Scout 3, and with the barest of pauses, Big Tom of the Forest, and Rudy." The constable eyed each in turn with suspicion, even the dog, who pranced happily for the attention of both his mistress and the stranger. "Passing through, then?" "Yes," she nodded. "Aunt Jenny, you say? Foreign name. One it seems I've heard tell of." "That's possible, though perhaps it was my own great-aunt, little Jenny." The constable grunted, but his countenance brightened a bit. "Is as may be." Then he added, "Well, if you're bringing no troubles with you, then you be welcome as you pass through." That he stepped out of their way. The other folk on the dock followed his lead, stepping aside as they passed. Blackfish was a small town, and finding the road upstream was easy enough. The Wolfdales, or at least the section the road took them through, was much less forested than the parts of the halflands they had seen so far. It consisted of rolling green farmlands scattered with bean fields and grazing sheep and cattle. Aunt Jenny couldn't help wondering how well the Dales' wolves fed on sheep. Being duskward of the shadowed isle, the small sun hid often behind luminous clouds. The air here was moist and cool, and the shadow valley between the hills was often shrouded in mist. The plants, both cultivated beans and the copses of trees, were dark green or shiny with silver. As best they could tell, it was early afternoon when the road began to turn toward the Blackwater to their left. A rambling farmhouse came in sight by its shore. "I think that may be the house of Vrain," opined Morwenna. "That agrees with my map," replied Aunt Jenny, holding up the silken sheet. A narrow wagon track branched off toward the house in question. As they followed the track, the house and its surroundings came clearer into view. Obviously, at one time it had been a thriving farm, but now most of the cultivated fields had turned to meadow, a tangle of grasses, wildflowers, and beans gone wild. A small garden that might be able to support the household alone if it was small remained: beans, squashes, and a flock of sheep and goats. To their left, downstream from the rambling and ill-maintained farmhouse and outbuildings, they could see a pier sticking out to nearly mid-river from the stone jetty. Two figures were moving about on it, one seemingly directing the other. As they approached the house, a young man, barely out of boyhood, stood up from behind a stone fence where he might have been tending the sheep, or napping. "Who goes?" he called out to them. "I'm called Aunt Jenny. My companions and I come seeking King Vrain. Is this his stead?" "Aye, it be, but you oughtn't call him king, not to his face. He doesn't like it at all. Sir he is, lordship, and you must. What business have you serving him?" "I'm traveling across the marches on business that concerns his lordship." "You ain't going to like it, you be warned." "Would that be him down on the pier, or is he within?" "That be." "Thank you." "Huh," he grunted, and sat back down to watch the flock and nibble a wild bean. Aunt Jenny turned and continued down the path. "To the pier?" asked Sasha. "I believe so. He said that be he, not that he be, I think." Morwenna said, "'Tis him, the one directing on the pier. He is looking older, more tired and unwell than I had expected, but him nonetheless. I should still hold back, no?" Aunt Jenny sighed. "I don't see that anything has changed since we all decided that. He looks to be the hermit we expected. 3, you'll stay with them?" "Unless great lady waves, 3 remember." Aunt Jenny, Sasha, Big Tom, and Rudy took the narrow path to the jetty and the pier. King Vrain and an older man, both dressed in broadcloth, tossed a net out into the river and tied it off to posts along the pier. Aunt Jenny waited for them to finish. "Sir," she called. Vrain turned at the sound and frowned at the strangers. He stood awkwardly, his back bent, his leg twisted. His face was pallid, his movements jerky. "I," he said, "I am called Aunt Jenny. I have come from beyond the marches, and am seeking you." "Jenny, you say? Jennifer from beyond, then? Now? Here?" He snorted and turned to check his lines. Satisfied, he limped over to a wood-framed net chair and sat down heavily. "Keep an eye on the lines, Cheddars," he nodded to the older man. "Aye, sir." Vrain eyed Jenny suspiciously, remaining quiet. "So you're the one we've awaited all those years?" he asked finally. "So they tell me." "You don't look very impressive. Do you really think you could have saved us all?" "Honestly, I don't know. It is not how I ever thought of myself. I'm just a nurse, a librarian, a teacher. but everyone keeps telling me that there were prophecies, and my great-aunt Jenny, who came here when she was little, more than a century ago, seems to have agreed with them." They stared at each other for a time. She was the one to break the silence. "All I know is that there are a lot of people now who need help, and people I would have thought much better suited to it than I are turning to me and asking me to help. So, while it makes no sense to me, I cannot bring myself to let them down, let Great-Aunt Jenny down. I've seen things, I've done things that seem impossible to me." She crouched down, sitting on her heels. "So perhaps if I do just those things that I can do, and that will inspire or enable others to do what they can do, well, perhaps together we can do the big impossible things. I've taught girls to be better athletes, better equestrians, better scholars than me. In a world of fair folk, heroes, and demigods, maybe I can inspire them to do what seems impossible. I don't know." She sighed, reached out, and laid a hand on his knee. "If what they say is true, if my tardiness or lack of the artifact I was supposed to bear led to all this suffering, to your suffering, I am truly, deeply sorry." He laid his rough, bony hand on hers, closed his eyes, and wept. He sighed and whispered, "She said you were coming. She said," and wept some more. "She said that we should help you." "Who said?" asked Jenny. He looked up at her, lifted her hand from his knee, and tossed it aside. "The queen who was, my queen, Vivian." "When? Just before she died?" "No, last night. She came to me in a dream. It's why I stay here, fish the Blackwater, the river that flows down from Dream. Here she can come to me in dreams. Here at the home of my ancestors. It is as close as I may come." "Tell me more, if you can." He spoke so softly she could barely hear his rasping whisper. He chanted the words without tone or inflection. All she could think of was dead leaves rustling, carrying the voice of the dead from beyond the grave. "The glass is shattered, the sword is lost, the lake is poisoned. My queen is dead. I am crippled. My land is blighted. I am king no more, just a fisherman. But the sword remains. The queen who was resides in my dreams. I fish. You have come. Come with the king's eye. It will bring the fish, and the fish the ring. And you will fetch the queen," she said, in dream. "Sire, sire," called the old man, Cheddars. "The bells, the bells!" Aunt Jenny could hear them too now, approaching down the river, the Blackwater. She looked up the river and saw a series of poles sticking up out of the water. They were lines too thin to be called ropes, just twine strung from pole to pole down the river, and from each line there hung a silver bell. The distant bells were ringing softly. "Take the lines, all of you, take the lines, the net," called the old fisherman who had been king. He struggled to rise to his feet. Jenny offered him a hand. He gave her a bitter look, gritted his teeth, and took hold of her arm. She helped him to one of the posts along the pier where the lines from the net were secured. Cheddars, Morwenna, Sasha, and Three hurried to do the same. There were 3 pairs of lines looped around 3 posts. Sasha and Cheddars took the ones closest to hand. Morwenna and Three the next, the king and Jenny the ones furthest from the shore. Closer and closer the bells rang. Something was coming. Jenny braced herself. Rudy ran up and down the pier supervising. Big Tom watched. "Pull it in, take up the slack," the king ordered. They each hauled in a few feet of line. "Brace yourself, go with it when it hits, slow it, then haul," rasped the king. Jenny looked down at her hands and his on the heavy ropes. an old woman's hands, and an even older man's. Then she noticed a soft glow. The amulet hanging around her neck, the amethyst, the king's eye, was softly glowing. The ringing bells got closer. Suddenly, whatever had been approaching hit the net, hit it with the force that pulled the coarse rope right through her hands and the king's. 3 wobbled and was nearly pulled off his feet. Only Sasha and Morwenna were strong enough to slowly give in to the force, easing the lines forward. Soon all the lines thrummed taut against the posts. "Now haul 'em in," commanded the king. 6 pairs of hands tightened on the lines and strained, slowly pulling them. "Evenly, together, you in the middle, Fay, not too fast." "3," said Morwenna. "I have this. Help the lady." 3 help, he nodded and ran to join Aunt Jenny and the frail king. Hand over hand they hauled the net. Rudy pranced behind them encouragingly. "Good, good, now slip the 2 ends and join her in the middle." The king began to raise the rope, lifting it toward the top of the post. Jenny and 3 assisted. Together they slipped it off over the top. At the landward end, Sasha and Cheddars did the same. Vrayan was panting now and limping badly as he, Jenny, and 3 moved toward Morwenna. "Stop," he called. "We'll ne'er haul this onto the dock." He paused to catch his breath. "A new plan. We'll join you in the middle. Then we'll all join Cheddars and the lass." Another breath, "and then all together we'll land 'em, drag 'em onto the beach." "Aye, sir," called Cheddars. Slowly, silently, they put the plan into action. The crippled king had to release his hold once his end reached Morwenna. He limped alongside, directing them, wheezing his instructions. Finally, the net was pulled onto the pebbled shore. Aunt Jenny was surprised that it contained only a few fish, no more than a dozen or 2. "You," he nodded. "Morwenna," she identified herself. "Come with me and take the beast." He hobbled toward the center of the net. At his direction, Morwenna lifted the net and brought out the largest, by far, of the fish within, a huge, struggling salmon. "Hold him up." Morwenna did so, raising the fish by its tail, its head only a foot off the ground. The king kneeled down and produced his fisherman's knife from a pocket, flicking it open with a practiced flip of his thumb. "Now you, kingfish, you can spit it out and be thrown back, or I can fetch it myself, and dinner besides." He showed the sharp blade to the fish, which thrashed and struggled in Morwenna's unrelenting grip. Finally, it curled, looked the king in the eyes, and with one last shudder, spat. Water struck the fisherman in the face, and there was a small bell-like tinkle on the stony ground by his feet. With a quick gesture, he closed and pocketed the knife, picked through the pebbles, and produced a glinting gold ring. After examining it, he said to the fish, "Good choice," and to Morwenna, "Release him in the river." Turning, he continued, "Boy, girl, help Cheddars cask the fish." Vrayan took a struggling step toward the farmhouse. Aunt Jenny offered him an arm, which he took, and they made their way slowly to the house, joined by Morwenna. They stopped in the mudroom to remove their boots so as to avoid the cook's wrath, and after pausing to inform that worthy of the need for an early luncheon, proceeded slowly to the den, each of them wearing soft sheepskin slippers. Once they were all seated comfortably, Vrayan rummaged in his pocket, then motioned to Aunt Jenny. "Great Jennifer," he said with a hint of sarcasm, "come see what we have fetched." She rose and approached him. He held out his hand. In it was a heavy gold ring set with a deep blue lapis lazuli stone. "She gave it to me in a dream, and here it is. She said it would come to me when I looked into the king's eye. Here you are, with the eye, and here's the ring." Aunt Jenny shook her head and suppressed a laugh that seemed out of place in the presence of the crippled king. "What is it, Aunt Jenny? What's funny?" came Sasha's voice from behind her. "Oh, I was just thinking. This seems like a true quest, a hero's journey. Everyone seems to know more about me, my comings and goings, than I do." I see. I was just learning where the old saw about shooting fish in a barrel comes from." Aunt Jenny smiled and turned back to the king. "I'm sorry, your lordship. This whole experience, the salmon and the ring's sudden appearance, Her Majesty's forecast in your dream, it is all rather overwhelming. Please continue." "My wife, she told me in the dream that you would come, that we would fetch the ring from the salmon, that it could bring someone to her, and that I should give it to you." His bitterness was almost palpable as he spit out the last word. "Oh, my dear." Jenny knelt down on one knee before him to face him eye to eye. "I am so sorry." She wrapped his hand and the ring in her hands. Must I? Must I really?" He closed his eyes. "Yes," he bit off the word. "It is what my lady, my queen, my wife, tells me. You must." Jenny released his hand, and he pressed the ring into hers. "I am sorry," she said, "and determined not to let all your sacrifices be for naught." Vrain sighed and sat back in his chair, looking broken and no more optimistic. "You say that the ring can bring me to your queen? Did she say how?" Aunt Jenny remained kneeling, squatting down just a bit more to keep her eye no higher than his. "Go by river up to Hayesmire. There you will find Fenmarch Station, where you will present a letter I will give you, and take 4 night steeds. Ride dreamward toward the mountains. Hold back the stallion. The mares know the way through the pass to Dream. The ring should gain you entry. Certainly one, perhaps all. You have that all?" "Yes, sir." "Chatters, my lap desk." And when that was delivered, "Have the dream skiff brought down to the dock." "Aye, sire." The king wrote a short missive, folded it, and sealed it with his own ring. "Take it and go." He waved in dismissal. Once they were outside and walking down to the pier, Sasha said, "How charming. We go to find a dream boat, to find some nightmares, to take us to a dead queen in dreamland." "Ah, but will it be Poe's or Carol's dreamland? The mountains suggest Poe." "I'll take either over Lovecraft." Sasha shook her head. "My dear, don't even think about it." "Well, maybe we'll get our very own dreamland and none of those." "Either way, it's a mighty sobering thought." 3 and Morwenna followed in silence, as did Rudy and Big Tom. Aunt Jenny caught sight of the skiff sailing down the river toward the pier. "Do any of you know how to sail?" "I crewed for my father on vacation a while back, but nothing more," answered Sasha. "No, lady," said 3. "I have, milady, but not in a century and more. And you?" replied Morwenna. "Not much, and never a sprit jig like that. I sailed enough with Dr. Tom, and I can tell a sprit from a gaff rig, but he loved sailing so much that I never did more than haul in or let out a line when he said to. Sasha and I can crew, but it looks like you're our captain, Morwenna, unless the king provides a pilot." The young man piloting the boat down to the boathouse answered that question by tying off its painter and dashing back to the house. "Worst comes to worst, we can always row," said Sasha, once they'd arrived at the pier and saw the oars stowed on board. That proved to be completely unnecessary. Though it had been long since Morwenna had sailed, she did have a great many years of experience, and it came back quickly. With her acting as skipper, Sasha and 3 crewing, they were soon making their way upriver. Rudy stood in the prow. Aunt Jenny pulled out the map case which Alba Heath had given her, found a map of the Dales, and served as navigator. And we will follow them up the Dream River next time.